Hey, everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. My name is Harry Bingaman, and today I have a special guest, Tain Nix. He was introduced to me by Chris Orzakowski, who you've heard on the podcast before and who's coming back on next month, actually, to talk about some big ventures. But Tain has had a very fascinating life, and he's one of us. So I thought I'd bring him on, have a great conversation. Tain, hey, man, thanks for coming.
How's it going, Henry? Super good to be on with you. Hi, everybody. And I'm excited to get into a couple of different things today with you.
So when Chris originally emailed me, he's like, this guy has an amazing story that would be great on your podcast. So can you kind of tell people your origin story starting in Switzerland, I believe, right?
Yes. Yeah, we can pick it up there. I mean, I left the US in 1997. It was a situation, actually, just very quickly. They needed somebody to teach at a Swiss boarding school on the boys' dorm, basically, like to live there. And they told me on Thursday, I bought a ticket on Friday. I was in Switzerland by Sunday and school started Monday, right? It was like, and so it was a huge page turn, like new chapter in my life. I was a couple of years out of college and working construction gigs, trying not to get killed. And but I spent a year in Europe, and the whole world just opened up. I mean, if you've really done Europe properly, and also, I was in a really scholarly phase. I was teaching English as a second language, but I did it through literature. I taught, I would teach great classic literature to students that were old enough to handle that. And for me, it was also like, I was also deep. I mean, I wasn't that old, in your mid-20s, you're very, very open to what's going on in the world. And I toured Europe on a motorcycle, and I did a whole tour of Spain, and I ran with the bulls, and I did all kinds of crazy, nutty stuff. But the world opened up to me in that year in a way that I knew even without acknowledging it, consciously, that there was no way I was going back into a box or a cubicle or, going back to the US. I'm going to take some kind of day job, to sort of get by and, start making money. I knew I was going to have a really, really nutty adventure after that. And so Europe really was the start of all of that for me. And then it just got crazier after that.
So Switzerland is kind of an interesting place in Europe, right? It's the neutral zone or whatever. And they speak three languages there, right? It's French, German, and
French, German, and Italian. And the part
yeah.
we were very close to we were in the German section, but I had Italian students too. So, and I spent time in Italy. So yeah, Italian in the southern part, Lugano.
So what was it like actually teaching? So you're in your early 20s. This is 97, you said?
97, 98.
Yeah. So you're really probably pretty young then. What was it like just being abroad at that point in your life when there's so like your mind is still expanding, right? Your brain literally isn't done developing at that point. So
No, exactly. Honestly, I knew that I had died and gone to heaven. I mean, I was living on the top of a mountain in Switzerland. You take what's called a Seilbahn, which is like it's not a cable car. It's like a track car that goes up the mountain. So it was an old hotel that they converted into a boarding school. The president and the prime minister of Uzbekistan and like really, really wealthy, big shot families in Europe and Asia send their kids to Swiss boarding schools. So I hit around with, Russian students with bodyguards. I mean, obviously it was mind blowing, like just on the cultural level, it was obviously I had no experience of anything like it growing up in the US. But as you say, I mean, I really loved teaching. Like I really loved having the interaction with young kids. These are, middle school and high school kids, basically, nothing younger than that. I saw how impressionable they were, like how fun it was for me to be an example for these people. I mean, my role was not even so much as an English teacher or as like the house father on the dorm, to make sure the kids went to bed at a reasonable hour. It was really just I felt like one of the things that I brought, and other students that I taught 25 years ago have said this to me too, how fun it was to have somebody. I just wanted to be a good example of what your life could be, because that's what mattered to me at that time. And I did have a kind of devil may care. I'm not gonna conform to this, that, and the other. And you have to understand, like I only taught 4 days a week while I was there. So I'd run off into the forest with a sleeping bag and just sleep in the Alps and walk around here and hike there. And then when I got a motorcycle, I'd just drive off and go camping and come back and teach class, for 2 or 3 hours on Friday and then take off again. And so it was mind blowing. I really count my adventure that I'm still on to this day back to Switzerland, because I knew at that point that the world, again, like the world had opened up for me in a way that I knew I kind of threw all caution to the wind, as we'll get into.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. So my first job, I went to college. I got a degree in fiction writing because I just was always following my whims in life. But
Yeah.
my first job out of college was as an international flight attendant for United Airlines, based out of DC. So I flew to Switzerland, Kuwait, China. I went to Beijing a couple times. I went to Narita, Japan, which is outside of Tokyo, and I just like had this giant adventure when I was 22 years old. And then I got tired of making $22,000 a year when I was
Exactly.
serving people paying $22,000 a seat in first class.
Right.
So that's why I started my copywriting thing. But it was always just the next step for me. And it feels like you're kind of a kindred spirit in that. It's like, what's the next
Yeah.
thing that calls to me?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you bring up something important because if young people are listening to this, and probably like some part of the online audience who would catch something like this, if you're a young person, there's a lot to be said for following your whims, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as you say, Henry, because in the end, what you discover is people who didn't follow their whims have real troubles, and you can be as successful as all get out. But if the ladder's up against the wrong wall, right, you're actually in trouble. Like I'm in my 50s now, and I look and I go, I put off a lot of money making. I put off a lot of the other things that all my mates coming out of college really went full throttle to try to get done. And having that sense that like there's an adventure out there for me somewhere. To me, I understood this instinctively long before I discovered Joseph Campbell, long before I delved into Carl Jung and really learned and understood on any intellectual level that there's really something to that, and that midlife crisis, like I still feel like in my case, like I'm still not even up to my midlife yet, so the crisis is somewhere else, but there's something to that, like following what you need to do because it's important to you really matters, and there's not a big support system in our culture. I think today people can do it more than ever because technology's opened up so many cracks for interesting avenues. But if you're a young person, listen to this. By God, follow your adventure.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things where, what was it back in the 1800s? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times with Dickens, and
Yeah,
it's always like that.
it's always like that. The
There's
world has never been different. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
It's the best time to start a business ever in the history of man. You can't possibly make more money than you could starting a business today, and
I
or
agree.
becoming a freelancer or
I
doing your own
agree.
thing.
Even if
Um,
things get really ugly, right? You're still living in probably the best time, but you have to recognize that like things that matter to you, especially in your early 20s, like they matter. Like that you don't have those desires for no reason. If you don't follow them, you end up running into all kinds of like ugly life situations, wondering and wishing and hoping that you had actually like, oh, I should have followed that path, right?
dude,
That's how I felt. Like I was deeply conscious of that.
I know so many lawyers who make, high six figures. Some one guy makes seven figures that I know. He's a corporate lawyer in New York City, and they hate their life. Like
I know.
they followed their parents' dream for them. And honestly, their parents wanted them to be successful. Their parents
I
had their
know
best
him.
intentions, but like
I know him too. I know exactly who you're talking about. Yep.
it's miserable. So you didn't stay a school teacher in Switzerland for very long. So can you kind of describe the next couple steps you had from there?
Yeah, so then things got really interesting. I had met a fellow, he was a captain of a sailboat in Charleston before I went to Europe. And we kept in touch, and I'd always talk to him like, hey, I'd love to come crew on your boat. And who knows, right? He's old, like he wanted to give the globe a spin. And he had the boat to do it. I worked with him in Charleston before I took off for Switzerland. I spent some time in Charleston, living in a park, right? I actually slung a hammock up in a tree and just lived outside because that's what I wanted to do at that time. And so we kept in touch. I kept in touch with Captain John, and he said, we're ready. And so I left Switzerland. I jumped on a boat with him, and we set off from Charleston Harbor. Now, this would have been October of 1998. And one thing led to another. I ended up getting off that boat, jumping on, I actually ran to Cuba for a little while. And I met a fellow in Cuba. I don't know, can I say that? I think I can say
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
I met a fellow in Cuba, and Cuba's a fascinating place. I grew up in a military family. And obviously, there's a certain level of conditioning about what America stands for. And obviously, you do not want to be in Cuba, right? It is a very, very tough place. Their situation there is horrible. It's been horrible for years, but it's a fascinating place. And it also debunked a lot of just conditioning, kind of family beliefs also that I came up with that you wouldn't possibly even question until you saw sort of like, well, here's what these people also think is true. And I mean, I was followed. You get followed by the police. That they're checking on you. Like, there's no question. Like, why is the son of a military guy on our island right now? What is he doing here? Do we need to worry about him? So you don't need to know the whole story, but I met a guy in Cuba, and he said to me, "Hey, you should check if you're going to." I said, "I'm going to go to Panama Canal and grab another sailboat after I leave Cuba." And he said, "Oh, there's this awesome place in Guatemala. It's a lake in the highlands. You should check it out on your way there. Ask for Susan. You know, she can set you up with a good hotel, and it's fascinating. You'll love it." And so I said, "Yeah, whatever. It's kind of on the way." So I went across the border. I got back from Cuba to Cancun. I took a truck all the way down, or a bus all the way down to I guess San Cristobal, and crossed the border there to Guatemala at like 4 a.m. Got to the lake as the sun was coming up, more or less, and took a boat across this unbelievable lake. Big volcanoes all around. Some people will know it's Lake Atitlan. And I ended up getting to this pueblo, and I stayed there. I didn't want to leave. I actually put down roots there. I bought a piece of property. I met a fellow, an old man, who taught me medical skills that I turned into a medical career for about 15 years. I actually ended up sitting for a board examination and getting a medical license and license to practice acupuncture and Chinese medicine in Colorado. And so I had this unbelievable experience, just sort of out of nowhere, just following exactly what you said, like following, doing the old follow your heart routine. I just thought, this is such a great adventure. I'm going to follow it wherever it bloody leads. And at some point, obviously, you run out of money for that kind of adventure. But, and we'll get to that part, but I bought property. I still own it. It's a phenomenal house in the highlands in Central America. And I took my medical skills, and I ended up teaching at places like Cleveland Clinic, and I put a hospital clinic in Mercy and in Chicago, and just met a wonderful bunch of people, and then decided basically the U.S. medical system is beyond fixing. And so eventually chucked my whole medical career, and like you, got into copywriting, which is how we know each other.
There's a funny saying. So Joseph Campbell's famous saying is "follow your bliss," but he later on in his life said, like, he amended that to say "follow your blisters." So that's kind of what you did. It's like, what are you willing to work for? Like, yeah. and follow that. So your medical career, this is fascinating. So you were partially in Central America, partially in, you said Colorado?
I got a license to practice in Colorado. Your listeners won't want to hear about the bureaucracy, but I did a mentorship. I did an apprenticeship, which you could do in 2005 when I did it. You can't do it today, but not every state will give you a license for an apprenticeship, even though I passed the same exam as everybody else. So Colorado would give me a license. I mean, the medical system is a racket from top to bottom. The people who give licenses own the schools, and they make 80 grand if you go to a school. So they ain't giving you a license unless you pay 80 grand. I mean, this is how it works. It's not about ability or anything else. And so I did get a license in Colorado. I have never practiced acupuncture or Chinese medicine in Colorado, but I keep it because I teach, and I still actually offer treatments to people and do trainings for doctors and things like this when the occasion arises.
So it's fascinating. How many careers have you had at this point? Because you went from teacher to I don't know, world traveler, living in parks, to Chinese medicine, to copywriting. You have a $40 million promo with Legacy, right? Like,
yeah. I had a great run at the Agora. I had a very, very lucky big hit, like early in my copywriting career there. But I mean, you asked about it, it's like, in some ways I'm embarrassed to be such a dilettante, because I think, I don't know, we live in a time, I mean, I watched Tim Ferriss when that book came out, and I think it was 2006. And I thought, and then, he wrote another book about diet and another book about, health and whatever. And I thought, we're living in a time when it actually pays to be a really serious, like almost a professional dilettante, where you just know a little bit, or you can do a PowerPoint on X, Y, and Z topic and then move on. But I was kind of geared that way for whatever reason. And I also think that I never really wanted to be in medicine. It's almost like it chose me. I got very sick in the tropics. And while I was studying, I was dealing with a very serious digestive illness. And if you want to get really thin, right, if you need to cut weight, that's the way to do it, because you can't keep weight on if you get sick the way I did. But I did eventually, like, I'm healthier now than I was 20 years ago. And I'm not making that up. I was really, really sick back in those days. And it was a really strong motivation to learn medicine. So everything I was learning, I was turning into teaching material. And my time in medicine was really about becoming a better teacher. I wanted to teach something, but it didn't have to be medicine, but it turned out to be medicine because of what I was going through. And so That was that chapter in my life. But like I said, like by 2016, I really realized like you can't, like there's nothing that can be done with our medical system. The people who run it want it to be the way that it is. I'm out. Like I quit. You win. Nobody's going to improve it. There's no room for innovation, the kind that I had, which was really to just help people with chronic conditions for dirt cheap. And that's not what they want, right? Chronic conditions are a big moneymaker, right? So I was naive. It was eye-opening. But I think also like the message to young people, you should follow something also that has real value for other people. Like that's just about following your bliss because like it matters to you and no one else gives a shit. Well, you'll run into trouble because like really self-centered kind of pursuits, in the end, it won't bring you the kind of satisfaction that something that's really valuable to other people. And in a certain way, that's tied to copywriting. I mean, when you're writing a copy package, you're thinking about the other person. You're not writing what you want to write the way I was writing stuff when I wrote about medical, whether, you know, my medical training stuff or, you know, about my own experience in medicine. I was telling what I wanted to write. When you're writing copy, you're telling what you're thinking of what you're thinking of what the reader is actually feeling and what's going on with them. And so all of that, it's weird, but that was kind of my dovetail out of medicine and into copy, I would say.
It's interesting. I had a conversation. I started it publicly, and then we kind of went to DMs with a very famous copywriter who I don't want to blow up a spot right here, but he was saying there's a lot of like flash in the pan frauds that have been chased out of the internet marketing world over the past about 10, 15, 20 years. And we kind of got going back and forth on what actually makes people a fraud versus not. And the line, he didn't really agree with this at the end, but the line that I draw is it's whether people care about their customers or not. And there are an enormous amount of companies out there who are doing very, very well still that just don't give a shit about their customers. And it drives me crazy. I don't know how to reconcile this because they're doing well.
Mark Ford said this. I mean, you and I, the last time I saw you, we were at Mark's cigar bar, and but he said this, or he wrote it. I mean, I read it in a book, but he also said it, you know, like watch out if you're working with people who sort of really diss their customers and sort of have that real contempt. Because like, I mean, I won't say his name, but there was a copywriter, I think he still works at my old place, and he's very famous, right? And we went to lunch with him. And he said something I'll never forget. Like he said, you know, like it's, you know, all you have to do is lie to people anyway. You make tons of money doing it like this. And I was like, whoa, like you can't. You're a big name financial copywriter. Like if that's your attitude toward like, I didn't want to partner up with a guy. Like I didn't want to work with him after that. And I know he's good. Like I know I could have learned a ton from him. But you're absolutely right. And I think to me too. It's like, it's very hard to be friends with somebody who talks behind other people's back with the intention of malice. Like that to me is that's a line. If somebody crosses that, it's like, all right, well, how are we supposed to be good friends, right? Because what are you saying about me when I'm gone? It's the same thing in marketing. Like people who have real contempt for customers. And look, I mean, if you're a copywriter, if you're a marketer, you want to make money, right? And so I also, part of the reason I think that I figured out financial copywriting really wasn't for me was nothing we did was illegal because the lawyers go over it with a fine-tooth comb.
Oh yeah.
But it passed legal muster and we never got busted. But there is a certain dishonesty about the way a portion of that business is run. And after I saw it and after I saw the sausage and how it was made, and after I did very, very well, I said, no, that's probably enough for me. Like I've had enough. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I invested in almost all the stocks that I was promoting because I would convince the only way I could sell was to convince myself. But there's a huge vein of people in financial copy, even health copy. Like you go into the supplement world, there's a lot of people. This was actually one of the reasons I left supplement copy, health copy in the early days and went to financial was because I was this like, I don't know, I'd been copywriting for like 3 or 4 years. I had done fairly well. I had a couple big hits. I had $1 million promo under my belt at 24 years old, which was great. But this company said, all right, we're doing this male enhancement pill. It was a boner pill, basically. And they're like, what ingredients should we include for you to be able to sell it? And I'm like, wait, what? Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not a doctor. I'm selling this stuff. Like I'm trusting you to be able to provide the research to do the best thing. And like, so many supplements are built on marketing, not actual health.
Yeah. And the thing is, you don't need to do that. Like you actually don't need to do that to have a viable business. But I know exactly what you're talking about. And obviously I don't know your situation, the people you were with, but I saw it from where I was too. And, you know, good luck to those people, honestly. But my time in the Agora was marvelous. Like I left medicine in 2016. I knew I had to do something quick. And so I was writing with AWAI, and a series of coincidences somehow landed me an interview at Legacy. And I was so thrilled. It was like one of the big breaks of my life to get hired there. And I just worked like a dog. And then I had one great idea, the first idea really that I did on my own. And I mean, you know how copy works. Like if you're a junior copywriter, you have senior that mentors you. And so I had other people helping me with this, but the idea was mine. And so I wasn't a good writer, but I was a decent idea man, because I had a real blockbuster thing. It did 10 million in sales the first year, and then they turned it into a webinar. It just blew up. I mean, the timing was right, everything was right, like everything worked, and it did another 25 million in like in 14 months. It did $35 million.
Yeah, sometimes you catch that wave, man. It works.
I know. I'm still pinching myself. Like I still can't believe that happened to me. And by the time I left, I was like, well, I'm barely better than when I got here. But a good idea in copy is obviously, I mean, it's at least half of the promo. If you really nail it, the right idea, well, then the copy not only writes itself, but it doesn't even have to be that good. And in this case, we had some really good copywriters help out with that in at Legacy too. So
yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, because one of the things we connected on originally is we both see some bad things coming down the pike for, let's say, United States, but the world in general. So I want to get because you live in Puerto Rico part of the time, you have properties in a couple other countries.
Right.
How do you view, like, I guess it's kind of flag theory in a case like you have multiple flags in different places, but how do you view sovereignty and where you kind of plant your flags and have your residency?
Yeah. So probably a lot of people watching this already know the deal in Puerto Rico is so ridiculous good for US citizens. I already knew about it. We sort of hit it at the right time. I mean, seeing your tax bill cut, I think we cut our tax bill by 85, 86% the first year we were here, which is just nuts. So if you're making above a certain level of money, I mean, I can't show you here on a camera, but I can see the ocean. I live like in a neighborhood with farmland and cows and geese, and it's just idyllic, and the ocean off in the distance, and probably the best beaches in the world. So like for me, the Puerto Rico thing was a no-brainer. The fact that you basically cut the IRS out of the deal for however long we want to stay here, it's already paid for itself over and over and over again. So setting yourself up outside, I think the main question, we were talking about this before, Henry, I think the main question for people, especially if you're a business person, especially if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you can work remotely, but even if you can't work remotely, or even if like only some part of your work can be done remotely, the main question really is, as you say, this flag theory of how you're going to protect yourself and your family and your assets, right? The things that matter to you from essentially a government that's gone bananas. And I think understanding the situation, the money printing, the potential for real civil strife in North America, the fact that also like the so-called first world countries are really they've passed an apex moment where a lot of downside is let's just say it's likely. I mean, I'm not wishing for any of this stuff, but I think if you're astute, you're watching the loss of freedom of speech and the censorship. And it's like you take I was just writing about this recently, like whether you like Tucker Carlson or not isn't the issue. Like legacy media and mainstream media is done. Like it's finished. It's also why, and I think it's worth mentioning, podcasts like this, the enormous like infrastructure of the internet, where you can actually get something like a piece of the truth or a piece of what's happening without all the filters of government sort of sponsored propaganda wrapped together in it. Are vital now. It's actually vital that you know that, and that you know where to go for at least reasonably good coverage of what else is happening in the world. Because part of the big danger is that it looks to me like people in the US are being penned for all kinds of, I don't want to say slaughter. I don't mean to use that metaphor, but I mean, are potential capital controls coming? Yeah, it seems to me like that's definitely coming. Are people controls coming? We've already seen it. So
I think the scary thing is that we don't actually know what they're planning. They're planning. They're taking more and more control, and we don't know exactly what they're going to do with it. So is it slaughter? I don't know. Like There was this whole new medical regime that they're been implementing that is making people sicker and fatter and less healthy. Like, what are their actual intentions? I don't want to find out. I don't want to be stuck when I find out what they are, because we're all going to find out eventually.
Yeah, exactly. We're all gonna find out, and we're probably gonna get what they deserve. You understand? I mean, that's been my attitude about all of it. And it's very hard to know what's going on, and it's very hard to tell what has happened in the last 3 years. I'm sure there's all kinds of we know. I think if you take an inventory, we know that our institutions have betrayed us, and the institutions have been compromised. And the war, if you will, that is already really raging very, very clearly from where I'm sitting is not between Russia and Ukraine or any of that nonsense. It's between people with political pull and the people without it. And that's the dividing line, right? The image that like some of the copy guys use, or certainly, right, Doug Casey, right, I think coined some of this. The drawbridge is being pulled up. And if you're not on the inside of the castle, right, you're going to be left to sort of fend for yourself. And so a lot of what I've tried to do, sort of setting up my own life and planting flags and protecting assets and my family has been based on just a very probably pessimistic view. But I think there's a time to be pessimistic. There's a time where pessimism is actually very freeing. Like, if things get this bad, am I covered? Am I okay? Right? Food, water. Am I out of harm's way? Like, I'm from Chicago, man. You don't want to be in Chicago if things get out of control, obviously. Yeah. And so I agree with you. I think also going back, the story people were told about September 11, 2001 was, I think, bullshit. And these things go very, very deep. I'm not saying I know what happened. I'm saying that I'm pretty sure that the stories we've been told by our institutions for a long, long time are very, very suspect. And you have to take that and you have to look and go, well, how long do people in power get to continue to play that game and pretend like reality doesn't exist or that they can get away with it? At some point, you bang your head on reality. And I feel like that's coming in a big collective wake up, oh shit moment for a lot of people. And so my thinking is the further you can be from the institutions that have the kind of power to control you. Now, we can't get away from all of them. Like, wherever you go, you're going to be in some system somewhere. Sure. But we've seen that airports are choke points. So I'm shopping for a yacht, like, can I get around on the sea? I can. I mean, I lived on a boat before. So I'm not saying everybody would do that, but you understand, like, there has to be some thinking for how you're going to manage in a world where the institutions that you rely on can not only not be relied on, but are actually dangerous to you. And I think we saw that, regardless of what anybody's opinion about, whether the sickness in 2020 was real, who was behind it, or whatever else. Again, I'm not pretending to know the answers to that, but I know enough about the medical system from having worked inside it to know that there was a big, big skunk in the woodpile. And that's dangerous. I mean, it's awful to think that. It's awful to have that realization. I have family members who were affected by injections. And most people know somebody, right, who got caught up in that.
I mean, everybody knows.
Dangerous time.
What was it? It was 70% of the U.S. got the shot eventually at some point. Right. And I don't want to get too conspiratorial, because in the early days, I was like way more, this is going to be very devastating. And now I'm like, we're going to find out over the next 30 years what happens. So it was less, I was more paranoid than maybe I should have been. Although maybe not. Right. I think I was the right level of paranoid because I never got the shots. But I don't know. It wasn't as devastating initially as it could have been, but we don't know what's going to happen.
We don't know. We don't know what the whole thing was. I do know from talking to Dr. Malone, who's part of a investing group that I belong with. And I've talked to him several times. He's a wonderful guy. He and his wife both. I may see them in Panama next week if he's there. He talked about, the guy created mRNA technology, you understand? Mm-hmm. Like his point of view, and it's worth repeating. What we're living through is the biggest medical experiment ever conducted. Yeah. That's very scary stuff. And so regardless of what anybody's position is on what happened, there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't add up. And so my basic thinking on flag theory, as you call it, is to really, right, you want to have some portion of your assets outside the easy reach of your government. Essentially what that means is you need not just bank accounts abroad, because that's still, right, you're still in a banking system. Probably some precious metals held outside the US. It's not a bad time for that. An asset trust, a protection trust, but not a domestic asset protection trust. You need something with the added protection of actual political dangers in your home country. I mean, if a lawyer says, open this trust and give us those assets, and you're in the US and it's a domestic trust, your trust company is not going to jail on your behalf, I can assure you. Okay, but if they're in another country and they have to actually violate another country's sovereignty, my suspicion is that's a step that is not going to be easily taken. Now, if you're Julian Assange and you painted a target on your back and the US government or any government wants to get you, they're going to get you. There's no question about it. But if you're just a regular schmo, right, trying to live your life and raise your family and get on, like, through this very turbulent period we're living through, that to me was a big one. Obviously, second residency, second passports, if you can get them, usually takes a while, or it costs a ton of money to get them quickly. But this is the world now that I've really put myself in. And I have friends with, multiple 5, 6 passports, residents all over the world, and all kinds of property and everything else. So all of these things to me are very, very important for people to know about and to discuss, because I don't see how you're going to stay free without them, quite honestly.
Yeah, there's an interesting conundrum I face because so my ancestors came over to, like, literally the Bingaman family came over to America pre-Revolutionary War. So technically we were pirates on the Rhine River. We got chased out of Germany because, pillaging is frowned upon in most cultures. But we became, farmers in Pennsylvania. So, like, Pennsylvania is in my blood. Like, it's really hard for me to leave this place. I love this land. I love the mountains. I love the country. There's so much here that I want to sit here and defend. Like, I have 16 acres now in the Poconos, and, like, I don't want to leave. I kind of have this, like, come and make me leave. But at the same time, like, I've looked at passports on some of those islands where all you have to do is invest $100,000. All you have to do is invest $100,000 in the economy and you get a passport.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. How do you balance the, like, because you're American, you've lived all over the world, obviously, and you have kind of, it's cool to have that broader cultural understanding that, like, America is not the only haven of freedom in the world, but it's also my country and I don't want to leave it. So
I agree.
I guess, how do you balance those kind of feelings?
I think I probably come at this different than most people. Maybe it has to do with growing up in a military family. I mean, this is a question that I debate in my own mind often. My feeling is, loyalty to your country of birth. The idea of America was the greatest idea ever created, right? For structuring an actual national government, and created the most unbelievable explosion of, and still, right, is a light to the world. There's no question about it. And loyalty to that idea is also very dear to me, right? Maybe in a sentimental way as well, but who cares, right? I also feel very strongly about that. And I have I grew up in a beautiful part of Virginia for part of my life. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I told you before, like, that part of North America is just stunning. To me, it's the most beautiful region of the world. I haven't lived all over the world. I've lived in a good portion of Central and South America. I've been as far east as Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, and as far west as Hawaii. So there's whole regions of the world that I've never seen. And so there's a lot out there. And I felt like that was also equally important to me. But the idea of defending America, defending your home, I get it. I think the debate, and I don't have an answer for anybody, I can only give my answer. And also, I think what the question that you have to ask and answer for yourself, everybody, every adult needs to answer is, first of all, there are things that you can defend, and there are things that you can't defend against. And the things that you can't defend against are angry mobs. Now, you're probably not facing one there, but, like, I have friends who live in very high population density parts of Chicago.
Literally why I moved out of South Philadelphia. Because
that's right. Yeah, you don't want to be in South Philadelphia.
BLM riots and the like looting and stuff. I was like, dude, this used to be, I lived in Philly for 10 years. It went from, like, an amazing city to, like, there's still amazing things in Philly, but, like, I mean, it's scary at some points. And it's not that I can't defend myself, but I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I don't want to have to, like,
want to be in a situation where you're having to defend yourself in that way. And I know we live in I own guns. I grew up owning guns. I actually like firearms. I think they're very useful tools. But you're talking about a situation where if that happens and it goes off the ledge like that, and things really get out of control. And the thing is, we've already seen how easily that could happen. We've already seen little warning signs during the summer of George Floyd protests and all the rest. There is no quelling that kind of insanity. And the other thing, of course, is if there's real serious civil unrest and the authorities have to restore order, you're not standing up to regular troops or National Guard troops. You're just not. So my thinking is I've seen enough violence. I've seen enough of that kind of stuff. I got a young child also to think about. And my thinking is there's nothing wrong with placing yourself out of harm's way. My motto, I think, in all of this is let he who can save himself. And that if you're protected, if you make it through the 2020s, God willing, right? Because obviously you get hit by a meteor or something, like there's a million other things. You can do everything right and still come up short. But I think a reasonable person would ask, hey, there are certain things I'm just not standing up against, and the government is one of them. And the biggest risk right now is these clowns that are running our governmental institutions. We saw what happened and the way, right, the CDC responded, and like the kind of betrayal that happened from 2020 to now. What happened to these people? Nothing. I mean, as far as we know, most of them got promoted or shuffled off into a new sinecure. And so it's an insane situation to be standing up against. Now, that said, people, grabbing arms and holding hands and making it through tough times in beautiful parts of North America, I say good luck and more power to you. I think there will be really, really good enclaves because there's lots and lots of good people and there's lots of good communities there. But what you get when you move out of North America, Henry, and this is probably the most important point, most of the rest of the developing world, like I live in a dirt poor Guatemala. If the world ends, I can tell you for a fact that people in my pueblo in Guatemala probably aren't going to know. Or they certainly won't care because it's not going to change anything. They got food, they got water. Okay, maybe the boats don't have gasoline to ferry you across anymore. I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of a scenario where life is very, very badly impacted in a place where the life is already very decentralized. And so if you can decentralize yourself in North America, then that's what you should be doing. It's easier, I find, to do in a lot of other places because your money simply goes farther. Whether you're saving 86% on taxes in Puerto Rico, or whether you use dollars, right, to live in a poor pueblo in Central America. We picked up residency in Panama, residency in Mexico. I bought a little property on the Caribbean coast of Mexico as well. So my thinking is, the better you can set yourself apart from institutions that really do have the power to make your life unpleasant, there's going to be plenty enough to fight against. But your ability to set yourself and get yourself away from most of the centers of power, the centralizing force, the force that is centralizing power into the hands of very few people, whatever they're able to control, I think you should expect them to be using that against you at some point.
So there's an interesting question. I think one of those centralizing forces that they use against people is money, the US dollar. It's controlled by the Federal Reserve, which is a non-political entity, but basically controlled by, all the normal political considerations. So what you talked about gold and silver and getting some out of the country. How do you feel about like Bitcoin, or I used to say more cryptocurrencies, but I invested well over 6 figures in crypto, and now I'm centralizing it all back in Bitcoin because I just don't trust some of the other ones. But how do you feel about those Bitcoin cryptocurrencies?
I don't own any. I just finished writing about them. I do own some certain cryptos because I got in so early that I'm up hundreds and hundreds of times my money, and thank God for that. And I'm just sitting tight. Maybe it blows open. Maybe the government, if the U.S. government's going after it, will Bitcoin survive? I think it has the best chance. There's a lot of wealthy people who own it. It is a very unique asset by itself because nobody owns it, nobody controls it. It's just a software program. Can governments make it very unpleasant for you? Yeah, but probably not all governments in the world. Maybe. I mean, we don't know, right? We don't know how nuts things could get. It has no intrinsic value other than as a transfer mechanism, and as if people recognize it as a valuable currency, okay, fine. But that could go really sour. I'm a big believer in the idea of Bitcoin because it is superior currency. But is it money the way gold is money? No, actually, it's not. I think it's a great evolution of how we would trade value. I think it's a fabulous technological. It's a coup, right? It completely overthrew, which is why the U.S. government is so troubled by it, and they're going to have to come after it by hook or by crook. And so I think you have to expect that there's going to be real trouble. But should you dump all your Bitcoin? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, my own feeling is if you got enough money, you should probably have some in Bitcoin. I think it looks like a it's one of the better horses in the race, I would say. I'm a gold nut, right? I'm way heavy. I just own bullion. I own gold stocks and things like this too. But and my solution is not necessarily right for anybody else. But I'm a big fan of holding your hand gold and also having it out of other people's reach, right? If you own gold in the United States, is that really safe? I don't know.
Well,
Like, would you
it's
confiscate gold? It's
it's kind of
possible.
funny because I have a bunch of gold coins. I'm not gonna say where it is, but it's not in my house. Like I have like I've taken certain precautions, and I don't know. It seems paranoid, but at the same time, like how paranoid is too paranoid these days? I don't know the answer, but at the same time, I don't know. Is it wrong to be too cautious?
Yeah, I mean, the best way I heard this, and I thought this is worth passing on to your listeners. I think one of the really clever ways to store your gold so that nobody has any idea, you don't tell anybody about it. Rent a storage unit, put a safe. You could even have a dummy safe if somebody broke in there. But these places have awesome security. Stick your gold in the safe and cover it with a bunch of crap that you buy at a yard sale, and just make it look and just pay the rent on it. Right? It's cheaper probably than even vaulting your gold. Which can you trust a vault in another country? No, like there's going to be some liability baked into almost any solution you have, but you could be very clever and just have a rental unit and do that, and nobody, like make sure your wife knows or somebody knows how to get
Right.
it in case you're gone, right? But yeah, I mean, you ask like how paranoid is paranoid enough? I don't think there is such a thing right now. We've already seen, to me, if the 2020 shenanigans weren't enough of a wake up call, then probably you should just go back to sleep. And like, you don't need to pay attention to a podcast like this. Certainly not what we're talking about on this episode. But I don't think there is a level that's too paranoid. The US government is bankrupt and it's being run by clowns. And what we know about government power is that it's different than any other kind of power, which is they have the power to use violence and they can do anything they want and get away with it legally. And that is enough of a reason to at least create, and back to flag theory here, at least create an avenue where you could pick up, get on a plane right now, today, go to the airport and get your entire family and go land in a part of the world where you've already set yourself up and you got enough money to live and you got 2 months of expenses which go way farther in that part of the world than they would in the North America, and you can just live and let the dust settle. Because I do feel like some kind of reckoning is coming. For it probably won't happen to everybody all at once, but it could, right? Cyber attack, like who knows, right? The tensions with Russia right now, which are absolutely insane, right? That any of this bullshit is happening, has nothing to do with anybody except the politicians involved. But it could go off the deep end very quickly, and then where are you, right? If you're trapped somewhere where one government has control over you, that's a bad plan, in my thinking.
So let me ask you, do you know the whole like blue pill, red pill, white pill, black pill like conversation?
I'm probably not clear on the metaphors anymore, but if you bring me up to speed,
So
I do know some of the ideas behind when people say and talk like that, but
yeah,
I get
all right.
confused.
So blue pill is basically when people believe that maybe there's some incompetence in the government, but they're doing the best they can. Red pill is like, oh, they're intentionally trying to manipulate and control you. So you're
Yeah.
definitely on the red pill side.
Well, no, I think both of those things are true. Again, it's weird when you talk about they. I mean, everybody has a theory that they are coming to get us and they are doing this and all that. And it's like, who are they? I mean, it's clear that Tony Fauci is a very crooked guy. It's clear that some of the people who are, some of the people involved. I mean, it was people who did this. This is a man-made catastrophe that we've just lived through. I think a lot of the B players were just, again, they were just playing a part. They were told to like go along. This the head of the CDC, Walensky, what does she do? I mean, she got gifted that position, so she would obey orders. So, and I think some people are just doing the best they can. I still have doctor colleagues, had to live and work in that environment. Nurses, a woman who runs a nursing, was head of nursing in Long Island at a hospital there, and like obviously talking to people on the inside, like what do they know about anything? They just did the best they could. And so we're living through a very, very strange time. This is a true paradigm shift. You can see it. it's very hard to know what's going on. And so
I
there's probably lots of very good people who are doing their best, and they're doing what they think is right. I think probably, let's just say the morons are greater in number, but the really evil people who with really malevolent kind of intentions, which are really nothing other than we're going to control other people, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. If you draw the red line on that kind of character trait, I think that's what you're talking about. Like, these are people who must be in control of others. And it's Hillary, it's, like, it's we know who these players are, we know who these actors are, but they're all in government because government power gives them the ability to enforce that.
I would actually say they're not all in government. There's some in the media, in the corporate media, legacy media, and there's some in the universities. And
yes,
I think
I misspoke myself. You're correct. Yeah, I didn't mean they're all in government. I mean government power. When you bring government power to the table, they got the gun and you got the knife. You understand? Like, there's not much you're going to do to stand up against the government. And I agree with you. The Tucker Carlson thing proves that even like the media don't even care about making more money. So it's that important that they shut up anybody who's saying anything against their agenda. That's disturbing. Like, that's truly true. We are truly in a new era.
So what I would say is the people that are calling the shots are malevolent, and the people that are trying to do their best are just ignorant. So in that way, I think the institutions are steering us intentionally in directions that increase their own power, and regardless of the consequences to humanity, essentially.
Well, here's another, if you fold that over even one more time, here's a new wrinkle to that. Like, it's not even clear to me that a lot of the malevolent people think of themselves as malevolent.
Oh, they don't at all.
In other words, right? Like, one of the things that you get if you read Hitler's Mein Kampf, what the shocking thing about that book, right? Not just the fact that he wrote it and then went on to be who he became, but he clearly thought of himself as a hero.
Yeah.
And remember, this was pre anything. I mean, he wrote it when he got arrested and when he was locked up, as a way to just sort of document what was happening to him, and then went on to be the Chancellor of Germany several years later. But it's clear in the book, if you read it, that he thought he was a great guy. In his mind, like, he was a savior, he was a hero. And I think a lot of these people also, whether they're heading up the, NAI, what's it called? Whatever Fauci was in charge of inside the NIH, right? Whether you're head of CDC, whether you're the head of, shutting down crypto regulated SEC, Gary Gensler, like, whoever these people are, they're in a position to do things that definitely do aggress against other people and definitely do cause, right? I mean, no force, no fraud. We can live in a world like that. These people are in a position to do both force and fraud and get away with it, and they're getting away with it. And there's not really much people like you and me and your audience are going to do about it. And so that's my basic take on the situation. Everything else is really details.
Yeah, I think they believe in their ends are justified, and so any means work. So they don't care if they have to say, like, it's okay to cut children's genitals off. They don't care if they say take this shot.
For the greater good.
Exactly. It's for the greater good. But so, all right, then the white pill, black pill distinction is black pill is like, there's no hope. There's nothing we can do. Just give up. The world is basically over. Just try to survive. White pill is like, no, these people suck. They're going to get caught eventually, and the world is going to get better. So on the white pill, black pill, where do you fall?
I think all of those things are true. I definitely don't agree. Like, you have to realize, here's a grand theory for your audience to think about. Why is all of this happening at all? Why did 2020 even happen? What was that about? Was it a hoax to get Trump out of office? What was it about? Well, partly, and Martin Gurry, who's an ex-CIA analyst, wrote a great book in 2014, I think maybe it came out. I may have the dates wrong, but it was pre-Trump phenomenon. It's called The Revolt of the Public and the Crisis of Authority in the 21st Century, or something like that. I think that's correct. And he really nailed that the internet has broken industrial era hierarchies. And he really nailed this, like the democratization of info that the internet promotes, where somebody with a cell phone camera can spark an overthrow of government in Egypt. I mean, he wrote this, it was 2010 when it came out, because he was just writing about the Arab Spring that happened. And one dude in a market in Tunis lit himself on fire and filmed it. And it got broadcast everywhere. And there was no way to stop this viral video from inciting real unrest. And then eventually, right, the whole thing spread. And Mubarak was kicked out of I mean, this guy was untouchable in Egypt for like 30 years. And he fell. And so we're living in a time when the internet has unseated the elite. And as he explains it, like the distance between the top of the hierarchy and the bottom, like the person at the lowest part of the hierarchy can do something to shake things up. We've never lived in a world like that. Nobody totally knows how to deal with it. I mean, on the one hand, we need hierarchies based on merit, but what we're getting now is hierarchies based purely on force. And so, and I mean, that's what's reasserting itself. So I do think that it's maybe a useful model for people to think in. We're going through a mad period right now because the internet has broken these previous hierarchies that we believed had our best interest in mind. And yeah, they might have been always a little bit corrupt, like the mayor in my town in Guatemala. Any guy who gets elected mayor, like he gets another level on his house, right? You know they're robbing you, right? But they don't totally drive the ship onto the rocks. And that's the difference right now. It's not obvious that they're not actually out to get you. Like, you're not paranoid, right? If government agencies want you to like sort of coerce you, I mean, nobody had to get the vaccine. This is another thing that I think makes my thinking different. You did not have to get the vaccine. And a lot of people say, oh, I had to get it because of my job. No, you could quit your job, actually, right? If it's that important to you. And if you're not going to draw the line at, you know, what somebody injects into your body, well, you probably should think about that. And so I think a lot of people regret that kind of thing. But my point in bringing that up, Henry, is like, it's not obvious that the government agencies and the people running our institutions haven't done something truly unforgivable. And how are we going to work that out? There has to be trust between the elite that run the institutions and the people who have to follow the orders. Right now, there's no trust at all. And I think in some ways that's a good thing because it's going to be their undoing. I mean, you can't treat the population the way they keep seeming to do it and then just order you not to pay attention to what's happening by censoring the internet, right? I'm pretty sure that ain't going to work. So I don't think it's time to give up and sort of bend over and take it. I don't think that's what's going on at all. The unrest that we see is exactly because you now have the chance to be freer than you've ever been in the history of the world. And governments are very frightened by that. That's a very upsetting model for them to have to deal with, this concept of being self-sovereign. What if no government controlled you? Because you essentially, right, what people in my position are doing, you play one government against the other, right? If you have multiple passports and multiple residencies, well, nobody gets to tell you where to go and what to do. And as long as you're basically minding your business and being productive, there's no reason they should want to. So we're living in a different time, right? And the idea of just rolling over and taking it is probably the wrong response right now. If you get busy and you team up with people who really want the same things you want, share values, and right, there's an unbelievable creativity that's happening right now to help people really get through this time. And it's a wave. I think you can ride it. Like, look at what AI is doing. Look at what all people who want to, set up, farms and cooperatives and band together in communities and all the rest, that decentralize and that have a different model of governance than what we've been forced to sort of eat it and like it. All of that is very positive. So no matter how bad things look, remember, they're also just as good on the other side. And so I think that's worth something. And so I suppose in that discussion, I'm a white pillar because I don't think that things are terrible. I mean, unless and until the actual, mob or SWAT team are breaking down your door, you still have a very, very good fighting chance to not just do okay through the 2020s, but to really prevail, right? That's my message to people anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I really think, my kids and my nephews and nieces in the 2030s, the world is going to be unimaginably better than it is today. So
it's possible.
I have this picture of the world where there's like this giant gate where, the elites are on one side and they've closed the gates and the camera's focused on the populace, like beating on the gates, but there's no walls. If you panned the camera back, you can just go around it these days.
That's right.
Like the internet has destroyed the walls, even though that gate is still, like, the institutional gates are still in place.
Yeah,
so
I agree. I think the elites are running scared. I think people who have been in very, again, I mean, if you're part of the government or you're part of Wall Street, you can just print up a bunch of money and bail your friends out and all the rest. Well, that's what you're going to do. And that's what we've seen decade after decade now. It's obviously getting old. It's very stale, right? People are very sick of that kind of access and privilege. They can try to censor everybody and order you to obey and all the rest. But the truth is, it's a very, very big world. You have a lot of options and opportunities to just say, like, you know what, I'm not playing that game anymore. There's a better game going on over here. And, again, for folks in North America who don't want to go full expat. You really don't have to, but you probably shouldn't do nothing. You probably should have some kind of plan to, again, the easy choke points and your real Achilles heel if you're in North America, because it's political risk that again, like imagine you're a person in Canada who donated to the truckers. You didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't even illegal at the time that you did it, but you're on somebody's shit list now. And maybe they did confiscate your savings. You know, I met a lot of Canadians in Mexico talking about this. And so having something where a piece of your life is actually outside of the reach of your home government is enough. I mean, if we're just playing the game probabilistically, Henry, I think that's the big message or the big step that I would encourage everybody to take. Find out how to get your assets outside the easy reach of your home government. Figure out how to get residency. It's not that hard to do. People flocking to Mexico with a really great residency program. Mexico is a wonderful place to be. You're more free in Mexico than most of the United States now. And it's a really agreeable lifestyle, I think, for most people. Lots of parts of Mexico to enjoy.
Yep.
And you know, if you have the proper paperwork and you can get into your adopted country and you have some wealth there so that you can live, even if it's just for a few months, if things get really ugly back home, that's a lot. Like you've done a lot. Like you're probably in the 95th percentile of, okay, in the case of nuclear war, then all bets are off. But otherwise, we're probably going to get through this. And that's what I encourage people to do. You should think probabilistically and put the pieces in place for the obvious dangers. The banking system is having all kinds of strange behaviors in it right now. You shouldn't need more warning than that to try to take a piece of your money and just get it out of the reach of the banking system. That's a smart thing to do.
I know you've got a couple of resources that you're going to point some people to, but what are, before we plug your stuff at the end of this, what are a couple steps you think, all right, let's just say it's somebody in their early 30s or late 20s, they had a little bit of a career, but they're looking at the system going like, wait, what the hell do I do right now? So what are 2 or 3 steps you think somebody in that type of position should take right now?
If you have a job and you can do it remotely, that's awesome. Like that's a big piece of the puzzle, right? If you can work from a laptop anywhere in the world with an internet connection, that's big. If you don't and you can get one, that would be step 1. You're gonna need to remove yourself geographically, maybe, probably at some point, right? If you want really the best protection you can get, you're gonna need to be able to jump on whatever transportation you get and get to Cabo, where you can at least rent a place, right, and ride out trouble if you're, living in the outskirts of San Francisco and the whole city goes up, right? So, but I understand the question. I mean, I'm removed from that generation a little bit because of my age. I think it's hard for me to see a lot of evidence that young people are as concerned about these things as you and I are.
So I'll give you one example. There's a guy that I interact with a lot on Twitter. His name's Jethro. He's literally moving to El Salvador and living a Bitcoin life. So in a month or 2, he's going to just pick up and go. So there are the people that are the NPCs in that generation that are in their 20s or 30s, and like they have no hope. I don't know what to do with them. They're going to be like government slaves no matter what happens. But I think there's also a portion of that generation that's awake, right? That wants to know what the hell to do. And they see what's going on, and they watch, like me, they watched the Ron Paul campaign in 2008, and they got awakened to some of these ideas. They'd realized the Fed is printing money and this is unsustainable. And the Bitcoin movement has a lot to do with this. Just whether or not Bitcoin catches on, the fact that people realize now that the dollar is how fake the dollar is, we can never thank Bitcoiners enough for showing us that.
And you can't put that secret back in the bottle that it got out of either. And so I agree. And you bring up an important point. If you're young and you're listening to this, in your 20s, early 20s, mid 20s, early 30s, even, you get to pay all the debt that these people are running up, and your kids and my kids and all the rest. It's like taking reasonable steps to remove yourself from the consequences, because they're not even likely consequences. You're looking at default, you're looking at currency prices, you're looking at a banking collapse. Like all of these things are now on the table, and they're actually probable. I mean, to some degree, that's probable, and the young generation gets to pay for it because everybody who did it is going to be dead and gone. And so understanding that and just thinking according to, well, how am I going to unglue myself from a system that obviously if the people who are doing this gave a shit about you, they wouldn't be doing it. I don't know if you know this, like Bill Bonner, famously, the founder of the Agora, where Henry and I worked, famously, actually, he actually did file a lawsuit on behalf of his son. And it was done as a publicity thing too. But I mean, he was earnest in trying to bring awareness to, but you can't do this to the currency. You can't create this problem for future generations. It's mean-spirited, right? That a bunch of old people are going to live at the expense of future generations by just printing up fake money and like debts be damned. And so that is the situation that young people are in. And so all the more reason to look into, I haven't been to El Salvador. I know Central America pretty well from my, 20 years on and off living in and out of Guatemala. I've visited other places, but I don't know El Salvador very well. It's a rough place, man. It's dangerous. Honduras is dangerous. But the thing about these countries that are really at zero is that going from 0 to 1 is really impressive. In the US, if you go from 99 to 100, you don't really notice much because it's all so nice anyway. But these places that are actually seeing real growth because of entrepreneurs, business people, an environment that says, yeah, don't put up with non-shenanigans in your home country. Come here. We want you here. It ain't as nice as Austin, but there's also really great parts of these really, really dirt poor countries where you can live a very adventurous lifestyle. I mean, if you're not into adventure, if you're not into travel, if you're not into new cultures and like, oh my God, I don't know the language, so I guess I better learn it. Like if you're not into those kind of challenges, it's probably not for you. But the level of freedom that you have to create your own life. I mean, I did it for 20 odd years on and off living in Guatemala. And it was just unbelievable how fresh and free. I never had any of the constraints that my mates back home had to deal with. And there's something to be said for that. If you're a young person, you should probably saddle up and go out on the adventure. That
Which is,
my advice.
I mean, that's such the American spirit. That's what this country was founded on. Is like the pioneer is more likely to get the arrow in his back, but also he's the Davy Crockett legend if he makes it work.
You're really living. That was my argument. I'm so happy you said that because that's exactly how I felt year after year. It's like, but what's more American than doing what I'm doing? Because I had friends, I had a good friend from university. He's kind of gave me shit. And now he's actually like sour toward me. Sort of, oh, you turn your back on your country kind of thing. It's like, no, not really. I mean, I understand what the whole thing is all about too, but my solution to the problem is somewhat different than yours. And by the way, like I tried to be the very, very best representative of what the American ideal really is, and creative and entrepreneurial and let's get in with and let's live among the people and let's really see what this kind of culture has to teach us as well, instead of good, bad, right, or wrong, right? Many, many people around the world perceive America really meddling in too many people's business. And so it's always refreshing, right? For me, people tell me, oh my goodness, like you don't seem like an American, or, I never heard an American who speak good Spanish, or, comments like that. It's like, I'm very proud of that. Thank you very much. Like I work very hard to not convey a sort of typical, let's go tell everybody what to do because we can get away with it kind of thing. There's a lot of that out there. Oddly enough, the gringo go home thing is really strong here in Puerto Rico. It's crazy, but it's true. And I haven't talked to other expats here, but I'm not from Puerto Rico, obviously. And so it is weird I've never had it this strong in any other part of the world, but in Puerto Rico, where people have US passports, there's just a lot of just bitter rancor about, the unfairness of things and all the rest. And that's coming.
It's funny. I was in Puerto Rico a couple of weeks ago, as you know, right, which I just barely, we were introduced while I was there and I just didn't get to meet up with you, but I love Puerto Rico. So I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania. It was like 50% Puerto Ricans, just that came up from, a lot of them came down from New York, but I mean, they were born on the island, and I just have, I don't know, a natural affinity for Puerto Ricans. And on the island, they were incredibly nice to tourists.
It's fantastic. I don't want to say that like because they have a gringo go home thing that I also feel the same about them. I don't feel that way at all. Like they're proud of their place. They love it. I speak really passable Spanish. And so I try to sort of ingratiate myself but there is a real kind of dark hostility and resentment. And I think most of it does come from, like, anybody with ambition left Puerto Rico many, many, many generations ago. Yeah. So the people who are here are struggling, and maybe they know they should have gone, or I don't know. Like, I can't pretend to know what's in their mind, but I don't feel the same in return. I feel like Puerto Rico is a gem. It is an unbelievable find if you're in the right position to do it. So I love sharing that kind of information with people, and that's what I'm gearing up to do with my new gig.
Well, let's talk about the new gig, because we've been going for over an hour and my
Yes.
laptop battery is now at 10%. But so where can we send people? So you have some resources you've been put together. You want to talk about that?
I put together a brand new report where I go through the 4 pillars for freedom in the 2020s. Okay, it's I call it the bulletproof plan B. But you can get this up and running. You can basically do everything you need to do in about 30 days. I don't know anybody doing it that fast, but there is a way to do this. You don't have to do all of these things, but look, like you should be looking at residencies. If you don't have papers, you can't get in, right? This is what we learned during the COVID shenanigans. If you wanted to get out of the US, well, if you didn't have a bloody residency to get into Panama or Mexico or whatever, you may not have gotten in. And Mexico was fine, but right, not every place would let you in. So you need residency. You probably should have a bank account or 2 outside the US banking system. That's not an unwise move. Wealth protection, right? I said asset protection trust. It's very important to have this. If you have even $500,000 and more of net worth, you probably should be doing something to protect that in a way that puts distance between you and the political risk of your home government. That's my opinion on the times we're living through. But I put it all together in a very short report. You can get it over at the website is Sovereign Expat Files. Files is PHYLES. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the description.
SovereignExpatFiles.com. And right there on the homepage, you can get a free download. Have a look. You know, if there's something I can do to help you, I'm happy to talk to you about it. Not everything on the site is done. We're just literally, we're getting this done as I'm recording it. I worked on it earlier today and basically got it finished so that we'd be able to tell you about it. But I feel like this is an important topic for business people, for entrepreneurs, for anybody who cares about liberty. You're going to have to answer the question one way or the other of how much control the government's going to have over you. And right now it's a dangerous time to let them have too much control. And there are steps that you can take. You don't have to take the black pill, right? There's a lot you can do to protect yourself. And so get busy. You know, we don't know how much time we have to do this stuff, but I'll be happy to talk to you about it and help you if I can.
Well, Tain, this has been fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. I feel like this is probably the first of many conversations you and I are going to have.
I hope so, my friend. You got to come back. You come back to the island. I'm going to show you a really proper time. We'll go out sailing, maybe do some diving, right? Whatever you want. So thank you very much for having me on. This was awesome.
It's been a pleasure. And everybody, expat, what was the link
Sovereign
again?
Expat Files.
Sovereign Expat Files. And links in the show notes. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you next week.
Thanks, Henry.
Hey, if you thought that video was good, please click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks.